In some of history's darkest hours, during World War II, when the Nazis were sending millions of Jews to their death camps, there was one small nation in Eastern Europe that refused to cooperate with Hitler. This nation was Bulgaria. The people in Bulgaria, from all walks of life, across the entire country, rose up to save the Jews. Other countries surrendered their Jews to Hitler, but only Bulgaria and Denmark refused to go along with the Nazis' final solution. Saving Bulgarian Jews is the story of how this great rescue happened. You will meet people that laid down their careers and their lives to rescue the Jews. We begin with the ruler of Bulgaria during World War II, King Boris III. Almost 50,000 Bulgarian Jews were saved because of King Boris's actions during World War II. Without him, there is no question that the Jews of Bulgaria would have died in Hitler's death camps. However, there is a dark side to the king's actions that remains a stain on the Bulgarian nation's history. In order to fully understand the role he played in the rescue, you must first understand some of the history of Bulgaria before Boris became king. Boris became king following the abdication of his father, Ferdinand I, in 1918. King Ferdinand was a German, but he had reigned in Bulgaria from 1887 to 1918. He was a foreign prince, appointed by the Bulgarian parliament to replace the German Prince Alexander Battenberg, who abdicated after 7 years of turmoil. Ferdinand was a relative of almost every royal family in Europe. His cousin, England's Queen Victoria, did not want him to be the ruling prince in Bulgaria. However, despite strong opposition, Ferdinand was unanimously approved by the Grand National Assembly in Bulgaria in September 1887. Ferdinand put his heart and soul into becoming Bulgarian. He improved the country's economy and infrastructure. Yet the shadow of almost 500 years of occupation by the Ottoman Turks still hung over Bulgaria. On September 5, 1908, he declared Bulgaria an independent kingdom and became King Ferdinand. He was an expert on butterflies, small insects, plants, and stamps. He was not liked by most of the European royalty. His personality was very abrasive, and he thought he knew everything about everything. No one could argue with him or give him any advice. He had an unbelievable ability to remember almost every detail of everything. He spoke perfect Bulgarian, as well as 8 other languages. He raised his children as the king, and not like a father. He never showed any emotion to his children. There were no hugs or tender words ever for these 4 that he sometimes called lazy jackasses. All that mattered was their education, health, and behavior. Everything was about responsibility and dynasty. King Ferdinand was a very capable man, with very bad judgment when it came to political affairs. He dreamed of uniting old Bulgaria with the territories that had once been Bulgaria's in Macedonia and Thrace. He made terrible decisions that resulted in the loss of thousands of Bulgarian lives, devastation of the Bulgarian economy, and humiliation on the world stage. In 1912, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Montenegro started the First Balkan War against the Ottoman Turks. Bulgaria gained a lot of territory only to lose it later in another war started by the Bulgarians, known as the Second Balkan War. This war was against Serbia and Greece, but on June 16, 1913. Just 1 month after it started, Bulgaria surrendered, beaten and humiliated. The country was forced to give up the new territories it had gained. Then World War I broke out, but Bulgaria remained neutral until October 11, 1915, when again King Ferdinand made a terrible decision and entered the war. Like in the Second Balkan War, This war also ended in disaster for Bulgaria. The country's own army turned against it, and Ferdinand was forced to surrender to the victorious Allies. Bulgaria lost everything it had gained in territory. The conditions of Bulgaria's surrender demanded the abdication of King Ferdinand, and on October 3, 1918, at the age of 25, Boris, the eldest son of the disgraced Ferdinand, became King Boris III. Ferdinand quietly left Bulgaria, never to return. Boris was a quiet boy who loved botany and butterflies. He also loved speedboats, cars, and was a professional locomotive engineer. His early life was one of strictness and duty, but also filled with pleasure in the summer at the royal estates and the Bulgarian Black Sea. It wasn't an unhappy childhood for Boris and his brother and sisters, but it was one without the emotional feelings that children without money and position often have. Boris's mother died when he was 5, and he was raised by a stern and exacting father. King Boris remained the bachelor king of Bulgaria until he married Giovanna of Italy, the daughter of the Italian king, Victor Emmanuel III, on October 25, 1930. The royal couple had 2 children, a daughter named Maria Luisa, and a son and heir to the Bulgarian throne, Simeon. These were troubled years for King Boris, and on 2 occasions there were attempts to assassinate him. A parliamentarian fascist government, without political parties, was established with King Boris as its head. The country shook off the years of war and attempted assassinations, and experienced unprecedented prosperity and growth that lasted for the next 5 years. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and World War II began. Bulgaria, caught in the middle between East and West, remained neutral until March 1, 1941, when it entered the war on the side of the Axis. In the beginning, it seemed this was a great triumph for the Bulgarian people. King Boris was called the Unifier, who had regained Bulgaria's lost territories by entering the war. King Boris, who was neither a Nazi in ideology nor an anti-Semite, was caught between the Soviet Union on one side and Germany on the other. In private, with his family and friends, the king was said to have shown deep indignation and disgust about the inhuman Nazi attitude toward the Jews. Bulgaria's economy was connected to Germany. It was unthinkable for the king and the Bulgarian people to sever this relationship. Countries invaded and occupied by the Germans gave up their Jews. Only a few countries such as Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, and Bulgaria were not invaded and occupied. Denmark was invaded and occupied by the Nazis, but still managed to save their Jews. There were many problems for the Jewish people of Bulgaria during these days. The Jews lost their property, jobs, and professions. Their problems began on January 23, 1941, when Bulgaria passed the law for the protection of the nation. It stripped the Jews of their rights and was modeled after the Nuremberg laws in Germany. The Bulgarian laws were not as severe. However, most Bulgarians considered the Jews as one of us. There were no visible differences between Jews and everyone else, as far as the way people looked and dressed. Any anti-Semitism that existed in Bulgaria had largely come from outside the country and not from within. Bishop Stefan, the head of the Orthodox Church in Bulgaria, and Daniel Zion, one of Bulgaria's chief rabbis, were good friends. King Boris, a highly decorated soldier, had fought in Bulgaria's previous wars, and he knew about the destruction of life and property that wars cause. He committed no troops to the Nazi war effort and refused to fight against the Soviet Union. He often said, "We are always with Germany, never against Russia." Bulgarian territory was used by Hitler's armies as a staging area and gateway into Yugoslavia and Greece for Germany to attack and quickly defeat both countries. Bulgaria, to its shame, also allowed their soldiers and police to collect and deport the 11,383 Jews of Macedonia and Thrace. They were deported to Treblinka in eastern Poland, where only a few survived. According to the family's website, King Boris became aware of what was happening with the Jews, but the news came too late to save them. The trains carrying the Jews had already left Bulgarian territory. King Boris is reported to have said, "I will tell you who those miserable people were, for whom I could do nothing, my hands were literally tied. But remember what I am telling you now, none of our Jews shall be taken away." He sent the Bulgarian Jews living in Old Bulgaria into the countryside, where they would be almost impossible to find, and deport them to the death camps. The deportation orders that affected the Jews of Bulgaria and those living in Macedonia and Thrace were signed on February 22, 1943, by Alexander Belov, the Bulgarian Commissioner of Jewish Affairs, and Theodor Daniker, an SS officer, an associate of Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief organizers of the Holocaust. 8,000 Jews from Bulgaria plus 12,000 from Macedonia and Thrace were to be deported on March 10, 1943. The Bulgarian documents to deport the Jews were the first and only ones ever signed between Germany and another country. The Nazis wanted no records to incriminate them after the war. The non-Jewish leaders in the small town of Kustendil found out about the deportation before it was to happen on March 10, 1943, and immediately organized a group of men to visit with Dimitar Payshev, deputy speaker of the Bulgarian parliament. Payshev went to the Bulgarian Interior Minister, Peter Grabowski, and confronted him. He denied everything concerning the deportations. After Payshev threatened to cause a national scandal, word came that the deportation was cancelled. This could have only been approved by King Boris, since he alone had the final say concerning the deportation of the Jews. On April 15, 1943, the king met with the bishops of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church and asked them to support the deportations. He told them many other countries had already agreed to handle their Jewish problem by deporting them. The bishops refused to support the king's request. The Nazi forces in Bulgaria tried again in May of 1943 to deport the Jews, but King Boris refused to go along with their scheme. King Boris understood that the war was lost. Germany's defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943 meant there was no way the Germans could prevail. The king met one last time with Hitler at the Wolf's Lair in eastern Poland on August 14, 1943, where he again refused to join the war effort against Russia or deport the Jews. Soon after returning to Bulgaria, he told those close to him, "Hitler went into a rage. When I refused his demands about Russia and the Jews in Bulgaria. Screaming like a madman, he attacked me in Bulgaria in a torrent of accusations and threats. It was horrible. But I did not give in 1 inch." King Boris took one last trip to the Bulgarian mountains while he was alive. There, he insisted on being left alone by his aides, as he hiked up to the highest point. Later, he was found at the top of the mountain, looking down into the precipice below. He returned to Sofia, but the end was near. A few days later, he complained of chest pains and grew very ill. He would never recover. King Boris died on August 28, 1943. Many at the time thought he was poisoned by the Nazis. Thousands of people lined the streets to mourn the passing of the king. Following a large, state funeral at the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral in Sofia, he was taken by train to the Bulgarian mountains and buried at Rila Monastery. His body was later exhumed and reburied at his palace near Sofia. But even there, this man who loved trains, flowers and butterflies would find no rest. His zinc coffin was again exhumed and buried in a secret place. The king's heart was later found during an excavation at the palace in a glass cylinder. It was again taken to Rila Monastery, where it rests today in Bulgaria's highest place of honor. Thanks to the efforts of many, by the end of the war, there were more Jews in Bulgaria than before the war started. The king's role in the rescue is both one of glory and loathing, but it is doubtful that the Jews could have been saved in Bulgaria had it not been for King Boris. After King Boris's death, the Soviet Red Army supported the Bulgarian coup of 1944, which brought the Bulgarian Communist Party to power, and in 1946, a communist regime was established, with Georgy Dimitrov as prime minister. The monarchy was abolished and King Boris's son, Simeon, heir to the Bulgarian throne, was sent into exile. The People's Republic of Bulgaria was established, which lasted until 1990. By 1948, at least 35,000 Bulgarian Jews had emigrated to the British Mandate in Palestine, a part of which became the State of Israel in May 1948. By 1950, most of the Jews remaining in Bulgaria had also left for Israel. As a result of King Boris's efforts, not only were close to 50,000 lives saved, but these same people were able to immigrate to Israel without any memories of the horrors of the Holocaust. According to those close to the king, he believed Hitler's anti-Semitic frenzy was the product of damaged minds. He also believed that by becoming an ally with Germany, rather than an enemy, meant that Bulgaria could still maintain a sovereign government within limits and avoid occupation by Germany. Bulgaria would have a greater say in the daily affairs of its people, including the Jews. Countries that resisted the Germans were invaded and suffered the loss of thousands of lives, deportation of its Jews and widespread destruction. King Boris believed that joining the Axis as the lesser of two evils. In the end, this was probably one of the main reasons that Bulgaria was able to save the Jews living there. King Boris told his family and friends that his hands were tied and he had no jurisdiction concerning the deportation of the Jews from Macedonia, Thrace and Old Bulgaria, but this is difficult for many people to accept because the final orders for the deportation of the Jews had to be approved by the king. The change in the king's attitude toward the Jews seems to have come on March 9, 1943, when suddenly the deportation orders were cancelled. From that time on, he would play a cat-and-mouse game with the Germans, postponing the deportations by claiming he needed the Jews to work on the roads and other projects. On April 15, 1943, King Boris met with the bishops of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church at his palace. He asked them to support the anti-Jewish policy and deportations. He told them to be good patriots and support the laws passed by the parliament, but the bishops refused. The Bulgarian Church had never wavered in its determination to save the Jews. Why would the king have believed the bishops would have agreed to honor his requests? After this meeting with the Church Fathers, the king could tell the Germans that he dared not deport the Jews, in light of this continued opposition from the Church. It could be said that the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews from the Nazis was much like the rescue of the Israelites from Egypt, on a smaller scale. Exodus 19 verse 4 says, "Yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." The Lord did the same for the Bulgarian Jews. He brought them through the war and in the end carried them on eagle's wings to Israel.